This portrait of my mother is of course not just a portrait of my mother, but of her entire family. It's unlike a typical family portrait in that they're not all sat together. It's a series of single face images of each sibling, and each drawing was done separately. So each person came along maybe 2 hours, and I did the portraits with ink and wash and bamboo. And I quite like this setup of the sitter looking directly at me drawing, and I like that the face is returning the gaze to the viewer, and my mother did brilliantly in sitting for her portrait in that she was returning the gaze directly at me. So it was very nice having my aunts and uncle in to sit, because many of them wouldn't have seen my studio. They all knew what I worked at, but wouldn't have seen the studio. So they each sat, some of them took me for coffee and lunch afterwards. So it was a very nice family project, and of course each of them knew that this was going to be given to my mother, Catherine Byrne, in May, which is the month of her birthday. They're done on roughly A5 paper, similar to this scale. This is from a series of self-portraits that I did earlier this year during the lockdown. A friend of mine, Leah, I had told her about this project before I even began, and she had thought that's a great idea, and probably helped in inspiring me to go ahead and do it, in fact. So I later sent an image of all 7 faces to Leah. Now, she'd never met my mother, and she came back with an email saying, "You're very like your mother." And I asked, "Well, which is my mother's face?" And she said, "Top left." And she was right. So she'd seen my face in my mother's face, which was remarkable considering she'd never met her before. This video, Breath, was made in 1998. It's a split screen video, and it was shown in Kilmainham Jail for the Sculpture in Context exhibition. It had already been performed maybe 2 or 3 times during the year. That was the year that my granny died, and my Aunt Rose also died. So the family had been spending a lot of time in hospitals during the year, and this fed into the work. I'd also had quite a bad asthma attack at some point of the year, so I was just quite aware of my own breath. I'd been working with the slates, which I came across in my studio. I found about 300 of them, in fact. And, well, they'd been left behind in the studio. So I was working with these, making varied formations. One formation was like a beehive hut, like skirt, into which I would climb. I took photos of this. Or a vessel-like oval type shape into which I lay, or other shapes that I would get into to somewhat activate, but I could step out of them and then they would remain. The formation with Breath was much more integrated. There was a pile of slates here and a pile of slates there. I lay down, and then they were bridged across me from one stack to the other. So without me, this formation could not be arranged, and without the slates, it could not be arranged. So this was a stronger integration of body and material. The oppression of the breath and then its gradual release through removing the slates was the essence of the work. And I remember being in the hospital with my granny and noticing visually noticing the pulse in her wrist, and that prompted me to make this work, citing the fundamental aspect of life in the person. Pulse obviously is blood related. I went with breath, relating also back to the asthma. Graham Watson, He's doing the job of putting slates on, taking slates off, and Fergus Kelly helped with the sound recording. This was made as a video piece. Very distinctly, it wasn't a document of a performance. As I said, the performance was maybe made 2 or 3 times during that year to relatively small crowds. And that was it really. That's the piece Breath.